We have been, in our study, changed into his image by Jim Berg. Very practical study, and again tonight, same thing. Challenging thought this evening. We've been talking about knowing God, and so we start here. We're going to turn to Deuteronomy 4:29 and Hebrews 11:6 and read 2 verses for you. But in Deuteronomy 4:29, we have this section about the law. And a lot of times when you're thinking about the law, you kind of get bored with the do's and the don'ts and that, and all the things that are going on. But he challenges them right here in the middle of this in verse 29, and he says, "But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul." Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read over these passages, they're familiar, and so my mind jumps ahead and I just go skipping on to whatever the rest of the passage is saying. And then sometimes when I sit down and I start thinking about the passage, there's a lot more that hits me. And while it seems on the surface that this is a really simple passage, if you'll notice, there is a conditional statement in here that is really important. He doesn't stop with the first half of the verse. "But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him." That's not where the period is. And I find that interesting because over and over and over again in Christian circles, we tell everybody, if you seek God, you're going to find him. If you seek God, you're going to find him. But that's not what God says. He doesn't say, if you seek me, you're going to find me. He adds, if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. In other words, if we are going to be content with just haphazard Christianity, if we're only going to throw a little effort at it, then we cannot expect to find much of God if our search isn't very diligent. A lot of parables in the New Testament when Jesus was dealing with his disciples about this. You have the parable of the lost coin, and you have the parable of the lost sheep, and then you have the parable of the pearl of great price, and the guy goes and sells everything he has when he digs in the field and then he finds it. And the statement is, how valuable is it to you compared to what you have and what else is distracting you? And that's kind of going to be our thought tonight. Knowing God requires that we seek him, but it's not just a haphazard seeking him. It is a very thought-provoking, wholehearted seeking him. Go to Hebrews chapter 11 in verse 6. As soon as you mention Hebrews 11, you realize, well, we're right smack dab here in the middle of the faith chapter, the Hall of Fame of faith. In verse 6 it says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and he is a rewarder of them that," important descriptive word here, "diligently seek him." Now, what's interesting here is you look back at verse 5 and it says, "By faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony that he pleased God." And he goes right into verse 6 and he says, "Without faith it is impossible to please him." And you say, well, what kind of faith did Enoch have that God sent the chariot and took him home? Must have been the kind that diligently sought him. Because he not just rewarded him for as much time as he had on earth with an incredible relationship with him, but the relationship must have at some point been so close and so personal that God said, "I'm going to reward you far differently than I've rewarded anyone else," indicative of the level of the diligence with which he sought him, I believe. And so he sent the chariot and said, "You want to know me? Let's talk about this face to face." Apathy towards God. You say, well, today's world, there's a lot of folks that are apathetic, and that's true. But apathy isn't a lack of passion. It's just a lack of passion towards the right things. An apathy towards God is the result of being passionate towards someone or something else. And so if I am apathetic about God, it's because all of my passion, all of my energy, all of my diligence, all of my seeking, all of my pursuing is in pursuing something other than Him. Look at Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. The more I start meditating on this topic, and the more I start thinking about all of the things that Christ was teaching His disciples while He was here on earth, I start to realize that a really large part of the things that Jesus Christ was trying to teach the disciples and get across to all the folks that were following Him was this concept right here. How diligent we seek Him, and how badly do we really want to know Him. And part of the problem of His day is He would be running around, and as long as He's feeding 5,000 people or as long as He's healing people, man, He would have great multitudes that would come. But as soon as He would start talking about sacrifice or service, thousands of them are leaving Him. When you read in God's Word here about some of the crowds that He drew, I'd hate to know how many people. It's possible that by the Sea of Galilee, when He's standing there and He pushes out into a boat, if you ever look at that area on a map and you see what He's talking about, there could have been 7,000 to 10,000 people there easily all over those shores. And it's a natural amphitheater. He would have been able to stand there and talk in a lower tone than I'm talking right now, and every single one of them would have been able to hear Him. He goes across the sea with the disciples, and my goodness, they run all the way around and try and beat Him over there. Huge crowds. What does He say to them? Look at verse 24 here of Matthew chapter 6. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, you look at your heart and you say, well, I don't hate God. I mean, there's no way in the world that I would say that I hate God. The point that he's trying to make here is if you are going to love one thing, you are either going to hate or you're going to despise the other. And then that word despise is an interesting term, because to me, when I look at this, I say there's varying degrees of despising something. I don't like nuts and chocolate. I despise it. It's a waste of space where good chocolate ought to be, right? So, but if somebody makes fudge for me and it has walnuts in it, I can still chuck it in my mouth and suck every last succulent morsel of fudge off of the walnut and then spit the nut out. But if I really, really, really despise something, would I put it in my mouth at all? And so what's interesting about this thing is he's saying, you are going to love something. That is a term of passion. That's a term of emotion. That's a term of desire. You want something if you love it, and you're willing to sacrifice for it, either time or money or something. He says you're going to love one thing, and you are either going to hate the other, or to some degree you are going to despise it. And what I see here is a warning that if you despise it a little, and your passion continues towards this thing, the more passionate you become about this thing, the more you're going to start despising this thing. Until pretty soon you wouldn't say, well, I would hate God. I wouldn't hate the things of God. But if you love something opposed to Him long enough, you're pretty much going to hate God, because now He's getting in the way of your lifestyle. If you consider God small, it is because you are passionate about something else. When we've been going over the doctrines, and I know it's taken us a while, that's intentionally. Before we get to any of the other doctrines in the Bible, I want us to understand how big and how great and how grand God is and how worthy of worship He is. And if He is not that big in our eyes, then we need to fix it. We need to see Him as He reveals Himself in His Word. Matthew chapter 16, verses 23 through 25. We're at the end of the book now, and guess what? He's still kind of dealing with this topic. Peter, first one to say something, very impulsive personality. And in verse 23, he says, but he turned and he said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Now, hold on a minute. This is one of the close three, right? I mean, when they go into the garden, and he's going to lead the disciples, he's going to take Peter, James, and John, and he's going to go on a little farther. This is one of the big three here he's talking about. And you'll notice that when Peter's like, oh no, that's not happening, over my dead body that's happening, and Jesus looks at him, and this is strong language. Get thee behind me, what? You talk about cutting somebody. I mean, I'm sure he's got Peter's attention now, and look at the reason why he says it. You do not savor the things of God, you savor the things of men. I have been trying to tell you that I am not setting up my earthly kingdom now. I have something much more important to accomplish. And in Peter's mind, let's go, let's put him on the throne, whoa, hold on a minute. If we're going to get close to God, then we kind of have to operate on God's timetable, and we have to operate with God's priorities. We can't operate with our agenda and be close to God, because God's trying to do things His way, and God's trying to do things in His timing. He goes on. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. And that's a pretty strong. You say, you skipped a verse. I did. I skipped the one that leads up to that. Then Jesus said unto his disciples, he's going to use this as a teaching experience. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. If God is small in my mind, then maybe it's because I'm big. Maybe I'm more worried about my agenda than his. Maybe I'm more worried about what's important to me than what's important to him. We're going to close tonight in Matthew. Well, we'll look at James in a second, but in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 8. And I want to look at a word that a lot of people misunderstand when they're looking at the Beatitudes here in the Sermon on the Mount. Simple verses. You start off in 3 and it says blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed, and they're real short things, but they're very powerful points. And in verse 8 he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now, when we think of something that's pure, we think of something that is uncontaminated. And while that's true, that warps this word, because this pure in heart does not mean a heart that is absent of sin. And if you're just reading down through here, that's the way you would tend to read this. Blessed are those that are absent of sin, for they shall see God. Okay, well, that means that I'm going to have to do something in my life to try to be sin-free so that I can have a relationship with God. Hold the phone. Wrong. That's not right. That's not what he's telling them. He is starting off his ministry here, and he says, pure in heart is a single, undivided heart. It is free from conflicting priorities. Now, we're not going to turn there, but in James chapter 4, verses 4, 8, and 10, he talks about a double-minded man. And he says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. In fact, he's like a vessel that is tossed about by the wind. And you say, what's the big deal with that? Well, if you are double-minded, if you're trying to do this over here, then you start pursuing, and then all of a sudden you're like, but wait a minute, I want to do this over here, and I like this. And so your energy and your effort goes over here. You're not accomplishing anything over here. And then you look back over and you say, well, yeah, but I think this is, and so you start with your energy and your effort over here, and now this over here is suffering. And you back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And when you get done with a long period of time, what have you really accomplished? It'd be like a carpenter trying to build two houses. I'm going to go over and I'm going to work on this house today. Well, after lunch, you know what, that house really needs, so I'm going to run over and start working on this house. And then I'm going to come back over and I'm going to work, and then I'm going to run over here and I'm going to work. Listen, by the time you get your tools out and get everything set up over here, what have you really accomplished? And then you run over to this house and you get all your tools out and you get everything set up and you start to work. And then you're like, oh, you know what, I really should get this done so that tomorrow, and back and forth you go, and you spend a lot of time being busy. But are you accomplishing anything? Are you really serving? And I wonder, if we get to heaven, are we going to have been busy all our lives, but we're going to stand before him empty-handed because we were running around double-minded? A passionate, personal, dependent relationship with God requires two things. First, that we are willing to seek him. If we're not willing to seek him, we're not going to find him. But secondly, and not too many people talk about this, and I think it's a problem in our churches today, we are willing to forsake all other loves. So many times when we talk about Christianity, we talk about adding God to everything else. That was Nebuchadnezzar's problem in Babylon. Daniel's sitting there trying to tell him how great God is, and he was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Let's just build us a little statue and add him to all the other gods. And Daniel's sitting there trying to tell him, no, you don't understand. He's the Elohim. I mean, there isn't anybody. Why would you worship this one and this one and this one and this one and this one? This is the only one you should be worshiping. Look how long it took before the message got through to Nebuchadnezzar. Not too long after that, Nebuchadnezzar's off the throne. Here comes a grandson. You got to start all over again. You don't understand who raises up kingdoms and who, for 4 different kings, Daniel, 80-some years old, and he's still preaching the same message. Why are you running after this over here? You should not be doing so. There's only one God worthy of love, and if you're not willing to seek him, and you're not willing to forsake all others, you're not going to find him. Let me give you a practical illustration. There's a young lady, and there's a young man, and they're Twitter-baited. They get that silly look on their face and that dreamy look in their eyes every time they see each other. And he saves up some money and he buys a ring and he's getting ready to get down on one knee, and she is just so excited, and they've got friends hiding in the bushes filming the whole thing. And he finally gets down on his knee and he's got her favorite flowers there and the whole deal, and he says, babe, make me the luckiest man in the world. Will you marry me? And she's getting ready to scream yes, but he says, on one condition, I really think we should continue to date other people. Why are y'all laughing? So what you're telling me is, in a marriage relationship or in a dating relationship, you think that's a silly idea. Why isn't it that silly in our relationship with God? We treat God as if we can add him into our lives, and I can be wholehearted about this, and I can be wholehearted about this, and I can be wholehearted about this, when the truth of the matter is, you can only be wholehearted about one thing. Everything else is half-hearted or quarter-hearted, or right? Because anytime you start dividing your loyalties, you're not loyal anymore. And that is the whole point of what he's trying to say here. He says, do you not realize, blessed are the pure in heart, those who have a heart that are free from any conflicting priorities? Because when they seek me, they will find me. Now, I used to tell the kids in Bible class, so we get ready to close here, when I read a verse like that, I'm sorry, but there's a test that pops up in my mind. If I feel like I'm having a hard time finding God, then according to this verse, it's because I'm having a problem with my seeking. He is not hiding from me. That is improper doctrine. It's wrong theology. He is not hiding from me. He is readily available. but he is readily available to reveal himself to me when I am passionate about him and him alone. I'm telling you, Miranda would have never said yes if I'd have got down on my knee in that sewing factory and said, will you marry me, baby, as long as we can date other girls? And I'm just going to bet every single girl in here is thinking the same thing. Listen, if you want to marry me, you're marrying me. We're not Mormon. We're not, There's a lot of problems that come from having a divided heart. Ask David, ask Solomon, ask, over and over and over again. And you can say, but I love this girl, Leah and Rachel, for crying out loud. He loved her so much, he served another 7 years for her, and it seemed like it was but a day. It didn't seem like that to Leah, did it? Because he was passionate about Rachel. And while he didn't hate Leah, he certainly did despise her a little, didn't he? In the way he talked about her, in the gifts that he would give to the children, and there was conflict in the home because of it. So if I'm going to know God, and I want to have a tight personal relationship with him, then I'm going to have to be passionate about him. I just can't be half-hearted because he's not going to go for it any more than a young lady would say yes to a half-hearted suitor. We're almost done page 1. Save page 2 for another day. Praises or prayer requests?
I have those spoken. Everyone to pray for a young daughter. He's been diagnosed with liver cancer and he's currently in nursing home. Rehabilitation.
Have they said how bad it is?
Stage 4. It doesn't look very good. I just wish I pray for him every night and every day. We have a meeting we talk about, and I just hope he comes.
I'm praised I found out yesterday that my sister Carol, her daughter and her granddaughter, Cindy and Candy, are going to be baptized not this Sunday, the next Sunday.
Anything else?